Hi, everybody. This is Chris Doherty, Vice President for Academic Affairs and Dean of the Faculty at Chestnut Hill College. I'm delighted to be joined this afternoon by Dr. Lauren Barrow. Dr. Barrow is Chair of the Center for Education, Advocacy, and Social Justice, which includes education programs, the criminal justice degree, our human services degree, our law and legal studies degree program, and then minors in sociology, restorative justice, and social gerontology. She's also Associate Professor of Criminal Justice and has taught in a range of areas at the college, including Introduction to Criminal Justice, Ethics in Criminal Justice, a range of special topics courses, victimology, field research practice, terrorism and U.S. criminal justice response. She also teaches the research methods course and an upper level criminology course along with the senior seminar. She's the co-author of Police and Profiling in the United States, Applying Theory to Criminal Investigations, and also the author of an earlier publication, Criminal Victimization of the Deaf. She holds a PhD in criminal justice from the Graduate Center at the City University of New York, John Jay campus. Also her master's from the Graduate Center at the City University of New York, and a Bachelor of Science in Criminal Justice with a minor in sociology from the University of Delaware. Lauren, I'm delighted that you can join us this afternoon. One of the things I've been doing in these conversations is just framing the time at which we're having the conversations, because things are so dynamic right now in terms of what we're learning about the range of impacts of the pandemic. We're talking this afternoon, just afternoon on Tuesday, March the 24th. That being said, let's start the conversation. Just tell us what your past week and a half have been like. What has it involved in your role as a faculty member? What's it been like?
Thank you, Chris, and thank you everyone for tuning in. This week has been pretty chaotic on many different levels. Personally, I have been involved with outreach to the students. This happened right before registration, so we have upper level students who were very concerned about getting their classes for next semester and continuing their education beyond this semester. So I've done a lot of outreach with students who had questions, who were feeling uncertain about the new framework. I was involved in teaching 2 external activity courses. I am the faculty mentor for the mission trip to Ghana. So that has involved a significant amount of effort as we've watched borders close and uncertainty descend upon there in other countries as well as our own. So it's been an interesting experience. And I am also the faculty instructor for the Inside Out program that we run on campus, where students participate in actually taking their classes in a correctional setting. And that was running this semester. And as we will uncover in this meeting, later in this meeting, the implications of coronavirus to the inside community are pretty significant and scary and overwhelming. So that's required a lot of energy as well. In addition to just making sure that my existing students are feeling that they are getting the amount of attention from me that they need, both as their instructor and as the chair of the department. So it's been a lot. It's been heartening. The students are engaged. They're eager to stay in contact. Maybe the result of this will be that they understand that they don't need to be on their phones every time or all day, because I've seen a lot of the students saying, I miss my connections. I miss my friends. I miss being in person. So maybe there's a silver lining.
Certainly need to consider every silver lining that we can at this point in time.
Indeed.
Yeah. I'd like to start the conversation just to set the context. When we're talking about the impact of coronavirus and the experience across the correctional system, and so what's included when we refer to a correctional institution, and what have other institutions done to stem the spread of the coronavirus?
Yeah, I think this is a really important question, because I think what's not hitting the news is all of the different levels of custodial correction. So when we talk about corrections generally, we are speaking about custodial and non-custodial. So custodial corrections involve where individuals are housed by the state. They have been taken out of society, and the state or county are housing them. And that would include anything from a detention center to maybe a court-ordered halfway house, to jails or prisons. So those are institutions where the individuals do not have freedom of movement with society. Non-custodial corrections are where we have electronic monitoring, house arrest, probation, parole, avenues where individuals are and remain in the community, but are still under the supervision of the state. So when we're talking about corrections, we need to keep in mind that that's a very broad term for anyone under supervision in law, in and by the state or the county. Of particular concern in this new framework are those who are in custodial corrections. Right now, we have over 2 million people in the United States who are housed in prisons, jails, detention centers, or court-ordered residential facilities.
When we think about this population in particular, and we've been talking a lot about at-risk populations as part of the conversation around the pandemic, the things that we're doing to look at those at-risk populations. Can you talk about the ways in which a component of the population you're mentioning that you described is at risk, and the unique ways in which they might be at risk because of what we're seeing now with regard to the measures we're taking in response to the coronavirus?
Yeah, so what I'd like to do is, because we were inside just less than 2 weeks ago, I would like to just read a quick notice that I sent to students that I think is a synopsis that will clarify exactly what some of these issues are. And we certainly have many more that we are entertaining.
And that's great. And if you could also just spend a little bit of time describing that inside program, because I think it's a really unique learning experience that our students have working with you.
Okay. So let's start with there, and then I'll move into what I sent to them, and then we can talk about the multi-layers.
That's great.
The Inside Out Prison Exchange program is an opportunity for anywhere from 12 to 15 Chestnut Hill students to be paired, ideally one-on-one, with 12 to 15 members of the inside community, and that is that they are housed in a correctional institution. Our classes run at SCI Chester. The program emerged from a program out of Temple University about 10 years ago. It is now multinational. It involves allowing individuals with different backgrounds, different educational histories, to actually find common humanity with one another. It is an incredibly humbling experience for me as the instructor. I believe it's enlightening for the students, both inside and outside. We remove the labels that society has imposed that are negative, and we make everyone a student. You are either an outside student or an inside student, and they are students of whatever the lesson is that's being taught at that time. So they learn with one another. And we've been doing this for 6 years now. So it's a very powerful experience on both ends. And the reality is that over 85% of correctional residents are going to get released. And so this offers them an opportunity to participate in a college level course with college level rigor that perhaps will create a pathway for them that's more positive.
I had the opportunity last spring for those who were watching to accompany to one of those sessions. It was really a remarkable experience seeing the students interact, and also just seeing the expertise that the students brought to the experience. You mentioned you had a testimony from one of the students that you're gonna
No, this is the letter. Now, so we are in class now.
Okay.
And the nature of taking a class in a correctional institution is that as an instructor, I have to uphold Chestnut Hill's rules and regulations, but I'm a guest in the Department of Corrections facility. And so I also have to uphold theirs and recognize theirs. And so the onset of coronavirus has created a really unique situation, because not only are we struggling and pivoting to meet the needs of our students, but the institution, the correctional institutions across the country are struggling on a much different level. So what I recently wrote to the students, and this will be a good place to start, I think, some more focused questions. I feel compelled to remind you that our inside classmates are particularly vulnerable right now. The environments have been described as tinderboxes, cesspools, petri dishes, and death chambers. They are cut off from their families and loved ones and lack the necessary resources to protect themselves. Purell is considered contraband, bleach is forbidden, soap is limited, and water is not always running. They feel that society does not care about them, and while those are not new thoughts, they are particularly painful now. Most prisons do not have fully functioning medical centers. They are basically clinics. Our friends and classmates need to know that we have not forgotten them. Pray for them, for as Dostoevsky has pointed out, a society should not be judged by how it treats its outstanding citizens, but by how it treats its criminals. So this is just a snapshot of the immediate concerns that this community is facing. We're coming out of an era of harsh punishment and mass incarceration. And the result of that is the fact that the prison population is one of the oldest cohorts in any institutional community, with people over 55 being the fastest growing demographic in that environment. And of course, if all that we're being told is accurate, that places them at significant risk and classification as a vulnerable population. Between the years 2000 and 2016, it has tripled in growth. So it's now the fastest demographic is this over 55 population. Most prisons before the onset of COVID-19 had such high elderly populations that they were working to establish specialized cell blocks or wings to accommodate their needs, because as you age, your existence in prison becomes much more precarious. Specifically to Pennsylvania, we actually have a prison dedicated to elder care. SCI Laurel is a prison designed specifically to house and care for the elderly and infirmed population. They have actually a skilled nursing facility located at that location. They provide hospice and palliative care to the inside community. They do have dialysis on site at that location. It currently holds 1,500 inmates. Of those 1,500, 500 are receiving infirmary care, and over a half of them are over the age of 40. So this is probably true for most prisons across the United States, that they have a unit very similar to a nursing home. And the threat of COVID-19 looms a little bit higher for this community, because I think what most people don't realize is that in other institutional settings, we were able, if you consider institutions to be similar to one another, we closed college campuses. We locked down the doors of nursing homes. But on any given day across the United States, over 8,600 people who are considered essential personnel move in and out of the doors of a prison, a jail, or a detention center. That's officers, administrators, medical personnel. They have eliminated volunteers and family visits and classroom and education programs. But even still, 8,600 people are moving in and out of those doors, and that's from the community into the facility. And I'm not sure that people.
And when you say 8,600, you mean 8,600 statewide? 86. What's the
No, that's country. Yeah, that's countrywide.
Countrywide. Got it. Thanks.
Yeah, I believe that's countrywide. That actually might be one state. I'm sorry, but it gives you an image of how difficult it is when we're being told now. And the reality is, even in an environment that is considered an essential environment, a hospital, a nursing home, some degree of social distancing could be achieved in common areas. They have some flexibility there. Within a correctional setting, the average cell size is a 6x8 cell housing 2 people. In some situations, that cell size can increase to 7 to 12, but then if the cell size increases, so does the number of people living in the cell. That per cell, there's one sink, there's one toilet, showers are shared. So the opportunity to social distance is so limited in a correctional setting. And in addition to that, when they are moved or have movement or the opportunity for movement, it's extremely limited. And it, depending on their level of supervision, they might be handcuffed or shackled. And if they're being asked to cough into their arm, you can't do that if you're handcuffed. If you are being escorted from one center to another or one cell block to another, the officer doesn't have the opportunity to maintain a 6-foot distance in that movement. So we think of this as, well, as long as it doesn't get in, they're okay. And that has pretty much been lost. Over the last week, and I say this, on March 9th, there was no mention of COVID-19 in the correctional environment. And I have multiple venues. By March 13th, at least in Pennsylvania, the prisons were closed to all external visitors.
Okay.
And then that followed suit across the country. We are now in a situation where multiple corrections officers have been testing positive for COVID-19. New York actually lost a correctional investigator. He passed away last week. They say he had minimal contact with the inmates, but it was obviously in the system. So we know now that it's in the prison environments on multiple levels. And I have, several statistics that I can give you about states across the country, but to expect that this would not enter into the prisons is unrealistic.
That being said, what are the resources that exist for these populations? What's available?
So the resources are starting to blur along the lines of interventions. So what can be done? I think it's really important, before I say this, to point out that there is another very vulnerable community in this framework, and that is the community residing in jails. Any state that still has a bail system is going to have a significant challenge here, because jails are extremely transient communities. People come in and go out, but what we have in jails is upwards of 80% of the population have not yet been convicted, or they haven't had a trial. They're there because they can't pay bail. And if people want to say this is an unfortunate situation, but they had a trial, this was the punishment, the risks come with the choice to commit a crime, what do you say to the people who haven't yet had a trial? What is our obligation to the people for whom their freedom is being denied because they can't pay the fee they need to pay in order to get out? Now, I should point out that bail reform was actively being investigated prior to COVID-19, and because it's inherently biased against the poor community. And so many states were already taking steps to reform or eliminate what's called a cash bail system. But not all states had achieved that. And so what we're finding now is that one of the calls is to release the populations being housed in jail who are housed due to bail violations, to release them into the community and let them give them citations to come back for trial. The other drastic step that a lot of states are now looking at is the release of any inmate who is serving, who has less than 2 years to serve on their sentence. As well, and I'm looking at my statistics, for California specifically, inmates with less than 30 days have been released. Defendants with bail of less than $50,000 have been cited and released. By March 21st, California had released 6% of the jail population in the previous 3 weeks. And they are now reporting that 2 of their corrections officers have tested positive, though to date, and this could change in the time that we're in this interview, no inmates had tested positive. So what are the interventions that could be utilized? Releasing anyone that doesn't need to be in there. Pennsylvania has unique challenges with that. It was reported this morning in an interview with John Wetzel that our biggest obstacle to providing any kind of release to anyone are our own laws. So other states have an opportunity to release on the basis of compassionate release. Pennsylvania cannot. In order for our compassionate release protocol to become activated, an inmate must have 2 factors that exist. They must be non-ambulatory, and they must have a terminal diagnosis. Without those 2 factors, our legal framework does not allow compassionate release. The other option that exists in other jurisdictions are commutations. But in Pennsylvania, the commutations must be approved by the Board of Prisons before the governor can issue a commutation. And right now, there is a order not to meet in groups of more than a certain number. So we're kind of caught in this. Our own laws are limiting our ability to act. What has been discussed as an immediate option is a furlough program. John Wetzel's examining a furlough, but before you can release an individual under a furlough framework, they have to have appropriate home planning to guarantee that they would have a place to go to. So that the issues that are attendant with that are that involves interviewing, site visits, meetings, discussions, all of which we don't have the freedom to do right now.
It takes time, all that time. Yeah.
Certainly. A particular interest also, there was a discussion in talking to some of my colleagues that, well, can't we just take care of them in the institutional setting? And as I mentioned to the students in my letter to them, hospitals do not exist in prisons. Hospitals exist in hospitals. And when an inside member needs a hospital, they're sent to the hospital. And so what we have found is that most of the correctional centers act as triaging clinics until they can get someone to proper medical care. Pennsylvania as a state only owns 4 ventilators, and those 4 ventilators are for 40,000 people that are listed, and 12,000 of those 40,000 individuals are listed as vulnerable. That is, they have chronic illnesses, they are elderly or infirmed in some way. And I think that I'm no mathematician, but we can all figure out that 4 ventilators are not going to facilitate the health of 12,000 people.
Yeah, that math does not sound good.
No, like I said, so, aside from that, what are our other options? I mean, when we have nothing else to do, what can we do? Well, we've been told wash our hands. We've been told to isolate individuals who test positive. We've been told that Purell and bleach and cleaning solutions of cleaning up high touch areas, handles, bars, those types of things. Those things are all considered appropriate interventions. Purell has alcohol content in it, and it is a gel. And in much of the literature, it can be distilled out, and therefore it is considered a forbidden product in prisons. And so whatever hand sanitizing product that does exist doesn't rise to the level of killing the virus. Sinks are shared, making it another high touch area. And bleach is considered a chemical weapon, so that would never be present in an institutional setting. In addition to that, who are you going to get to do the cleanings? Most of the institutions hire the inside community under a work model to keep the institution clean. When people are making pennies a day, to what degree are they accountable to whether or not they're doing a good job or not? And this is a big question, because if they're sick or or unaware of the danger that's happening, how diligent are they? How accountable are they to the cleaning that they are doing in the institution? And so there's a lot of multi-layers to this problem. And just today, we started to see mass call-outs from officers for fear of contracting the coronavirus. So that is starting to also impact what happens to individual safety of both the inside community and the officers if the numbers of supervisory personnel decrease.
I'm curious, as you mention all this information you're getting, what the community, what are the communities of practice that you speak with, the resources that you see and hear? Because certainly so much of this information you're providing is clearly not finding its way, and at least in any of the media that I've been seeing during this period of time. Can you just share some of the networks of individuals? What are the conduits for communication for a lot of this information?
So professionally, I'm a member of several listservs that discuss the challenges facing well, they discuss a multitude of things. I mean, the information I'm bringing to you comes from many different sources. So justice reform, which is not the same thing as prison reform or bail reform. So being tied into these listservs that I'm getting all of this different information from. As well, Inside Out has maintained a pretty steady flow of information for all of us, especially this semester, who are directly impacted. That has been a very interesting evolution as well, because in Pennsylvania, I don't have access right now to remote learning opportunities on the inside. However, there are some institutions across the country that have started to implement tablets for the inside community. Of course, they're heavily blocked, in terms, it's not an open access to the internet type thing, but they have tablets so that things could be communicated with them. Some of them do in fact have classrooms that are set up as remote college environments so that they can participate in a college course and virtually unchanged, much the way our students are. Some obstacles, but so a lot of the information is coming through Inside Out in terms of how to continue teaching the courses that we started this semester for continuity, much the way we're trying to achieve that for our students. There's also several newsletters that come out on a daily basis, almost like an industry, like it culls all of the information and gives it to me from across the country. I mean, in preparing for this interview, I have statistics on Massachusetts, Michigan, California, Illinois. What are specific prisons facing? I can tell you that San Quentin State Prison reported its first positive cases on March 16th. Delaware County Prison in Pennsylvania also reported 6 positive cases on March 16th, which was also coincidentally the day that the New York corrections investigator died. We also have correctional personnel testing positive. That happened on March 17th. Alabama reported their first positive tests on March 20th. So this has moved very, very quickly. And these channels that I follow, I went back to the first mention of corona or COVID-19, and there was nothing before March 10th. So I think when we talk about the rapidity, of how this information came up, right now, most of my listservs are dominated by COVID announcements. So we went from nothing on March 10th to 3 pages of information. And I think it's important to notice as well that, the conversation has centered around, this isn't the first time that we've had natural disasters disrupting our correctional population. We had Katrina, where, the aftermath of that was appalling, as inmates reported having the water rise in their cells. They were locked in their cells, but corrections officers did not come to work that day. We've had multiple hurricanes that were in at-risk communities where power was lost or food couldn't get in. And remember, these are institutions this stuff is a daily occurrence. Food gets delivered. So being subject to natural disasters and the failure of institutions on any level, but certainly the prison institution, to address that is not new. What's new here is that I think there's a real question on, even if we do implement furloughs, even if we suspend the requirement for housing, even if we somehow come up with a way that we can create the social distancing in the inside community, are we really doing them justice? Because either we're sending them into a community that might be infected, or we're bringing the community into them that might be infected. And the complicating part is, it seems rational to say, well, if we need to achieve social distancing and we need to isolate, can we put them in solitary confinement? There are two levels of solitary confinement. There's punitive segregation, where they're in there for punishment, and then there's administrative segregation, where they're in there for their own safety. So I think that it bears mentioning that if you are already alone and you already feel isolated, and then you're put in a room by yourself because you're sick, what are we doing mentally to that population? In addition to the fact that we have not been given a very clear time frame for how long we are going to be under siege, really, for lack of a better term. And the Constitution has guidelines for how long you can keep someone in solitary confinement without having them experience severe mental trauma. And so even if it's for their own good, do we really want to exacerbate the level of individualized trauma that we would be instituting by implementing what would be the only real solution that we have?
Yeah, it's as you describe it, and as you shared it with me earlier, it's a remarkable dynamic just in terms of the problems that are emerging and the responses that we're seeing. Is there anything else that happens at the local or the state or the national level that can provide solutions for this?
So what we're beginning to see, we've seen this across a couple jurisdictions recently, is that the police are now not arresting. The orders have come out that if the offense can be documented with a citation, to simply cite and release. This is being met with various degrees of concern or acceptance in the general public. I mean, if you break the law, you break the law. But the problem is, if we're going to take them into custody, we have to have some place to put them. And we have to guarantee some degree of personal safety. We are then taking custody of this person, which is why we are responsible as a humane and just community to provide medical care, to provide food, to provide basic education. These are things that we have to provide when we take someone out of society. So if we know going into this that we are unable to provide those things, we really have no choice but to not take those people into custody. And if they were going to be detained because they can't afford to pay bail, we would be doing a greater disservice, in my opinion, because these individuals would essentially be given a potential death sentence because they couldn't pay a $400 bail, to come back for trial. It might be of interest to the listeners that when Iran realized the level of difficulty that they were facing with the COVID-19 virus, they released, now there have been multiple numbers, okay? So let me just, with the caveat that I'm dependent on other sources, anywhere from 54,000 to 70,000 prisoners they just released because they could not guarantee the safety of those individuals. They could not separate them. They could not eliminate the threat. They could not stop limited movement. So they just released them. And I believe that China reported up to 500 of their inside members became seriously ill. Now, I'm not sure if that resulted in death, but it was a significant factor.
And I should say, as we did at the beginning of the interview, here we are, we're talking on the 24th of March, and things are changing hour, if not every day. And so every day, if not every hour. And so I just think that's sort of one indication of what we've seen as this is rolled out across nations. So,
Well, I would like to share also that there has been one other evolution to this, and that is what it has done to the capital punishment and execution process. Again, there are two executions that have been postponed. Those came out of Texas. And I think it's important to understand why they've been postponed. We know that evidence, particularly exculpatory evidence, can be uncovered all the way up to the time that that execution takes place. And that involves, that week prior to an execution involves active communication with your attorney, meeting with your attorney, the investigations, the dialogues, and none of that can happen right now. So two in Texas and one in Tennessee. Tennessee has not made the decision yet to postpone the execution, though they are on the brink of doing that. But I think in particular for this discussion is a story of a man here in Pennsylvania. His name is Walter Ogrid. He's 55 years old. He's been on death row for 20 years for a crime that prosecutors believe he did not commit. He was on the brink of being released from custody, from death row. Sadly, one of many exonerees who have been released from Pennsylvania's custody just this year. I think we're up to 15 men have been released this year. And it's important, Chris, an exoneration suggests they never did the crime. When an individual is commuted, their sentence is stayed and they can be released. But an exoneration suggests that there is compelling evidence that they never did the crime in the first place. So an important distinction here. So Mr. Ogrid was facing release due to the evidence that was compelling that he did not do the crime. And he began coughing. He presented with a fever. He was removed from the prison and placed into a hospital for his care. But all of that before he was officially exonerated. And I think that that's another layer to this that is one that I'm deeply and personally committed to, is that we pay attention to the fact that when 15 individuals are exonerated in 1 year, we have an obligation to make absolutely certain that the people who are facing this potentially explosive pandemic in walls, that for all of them, we are doing the very best we can to protect them. And it should be noted that the federal government is facing these same challenges, because we don't just have jails at the county level or prisons at the state level. We also have federal prisons. And so DOJ and all of the federal agencies, the Bureau of Prisons, they're all actively engaged in this. And their directives that they handed down on March 12th included stopping all visitation, which presumably they have done, halting all prisoner transfers. This is significant because at the state level, it's not uncommon to move prisoners from one facility to another for purposes of keeping them from gaining too much control or power within the prison culture, and also to keep them from getting too comfortable in one area or another. So it's very common that without warning and without notice, prisoners would be transferred to another state-run facility. That's been terminated in this. That they have limited lawyer visits, that has been implemented. They have begun screening staff, much the way all institutions with essential staff have been screened. They're checked for fevers and coughs and whatnot. And then implementing social distancing and restricting group gatherings. That's something that's been requested. I don't know how they think you're going to do that, but okay. So, you know, the impact across our justice system, from police not arresting on the streets to municipal courts or courtrooms, if they're open, issuing citation releases, not incarcerating, not holding bail hearings, the backup and backlog of our court system, postponing trials because you can't isolate a jury. You have a right to a jury trial. As well, the Sixth Amendment provides rights to an open and public trial. And that would mean conceivably that the courts could not prevent members of the community from coming in and bearing witness to a trial. So the answer to that is to not hold the trial. So we're going to see the effects of COVID-19 long after the siege is over, as we struggle to decide what the best thing to do would be.
Remarkable. I just really appreciate your time providing perspective on all of these issues, and I think it's such a unique example, a compelling example of just the impact of these of this phenomenon in the areas that you are expert in. Two questions I've been sharing with each of the faculty members I've been speaking with, and will continue to ask. Your teaching itself, you know, as you've looked at your own practice, your work as a faculty member, how has it changed this past week in terms of rethinking everything you do in the classroom in light of how it needs to be done through this distributed online learning environment? How's it going?
Well, you know, as I said to the students, I've gotten more creative, and I'm thinking about what it feels like from their perspective. I mean, you know, we want them to know vocabulary, we want them to know concepts, we want them to know ideas and cutting edge information. And sometimes in our zeal, we forget that this is a traumatic thing for this generation. They're 20 years old. We know from social psychology that they are extremely social. They need their peer group, and they feel very cut off and disconnected from them. And so in my teaching, I'm trying to offer alternative ways for them to have that exposure to the language and the ideas. Like I made a crossword puzzle for vocabulary words. I did a word scramble, because really, if they are engaged in a mental activity and they're learning the vocabulary, I'm okay with that. I am choosing to focus more on their emotional and social well-being. How do I connect with them? And sometimes that means meeting with them one-on-one, paying very close attention to the ones that I haven't heard from or who lurk in the background but aren't jumping into the dialogue because they're uncertain. So I am spending a lot more of my off-class time doing outreach to make sure that they know that just because they're not talking, I see them, you know, and I think that that's important on multiple levels. And I think we have to trust that our students will rise to the challenge when we're back into the classroom. But sometimes life is about more than just, did you cover all of the chapter goals? Not that I'm ignoring them, but I do think that there are some lessons that maybe aren't as obvious that we have an opportunity to teach here. So that's what I'm working on.
Well said. Last question, what should we be teaching our students about this moment? What should we be sure that we have Chestnut Hill College students know about this moment where we find ourselves?
I've been using this a lot. You know, Chestnut Hill has, we talk about relationships. We talk about the dear neighbor. We talk about being our best selves. And so I think that this crisis allows us the opportunity to prove that we've been listening. I think that our dear neighbor is redefined right now. And I think that, and redefined from the perspective of, we talk about it in terms of our community environment, but now our students are in different communities. So how can they do that? How can they be that dear neighbor in a different environment that maybe doesn't know about dear neighbor or doesn't recognize that as a way of living? So I think that that's an opportunity that I keep reminding them of. And also just that at the end of this, what we will have is the relationships that we have nurtured and that we have been involved in teaching them how to do that.
Lauren, thank you so much. Dr. Lauren Barrow, Associate Professor of Criminal Justice and Director of the Center for Education Advocacy and Social Justice, has been with us for this conversation. Thank you again for your time, and look forward to offering this to all the faculty at the college as one of our developing number of faculty guest lectures, and really appreciate the contribution you've made to this effort. Best wishes as you continue to work with all of our students and with your colleagues. And again, grateful for your time this hour.
Thank you. Thank you for listening. I hope I provided some insights.
Absolutely. Yeah. Take care.
Bye.